Good morning, class. Good morning. So what lesson is it? Oh, look at that. Look at that. They're on top of their game this morning. Dare to be a leader is the title of this lesson in our series, Facing Goliath. And there's just a ton of text verses today. I'm not going to read them all because it'd take half the lesson. And so we'll read some of them. We're going to read 1 Samuel 22, 1-2. And then 2 Samuel 23, 1-5. We won't bother with 8-22 because we'll pick up on some of those later. So let's stand, please. And since I'm jumping around so much, I'm not going to grab my Bible and do it. I'm going to read from my notes. David therefore departed thence and escaped to the cave of Adullam. And when his brethren and all his father's house heard it, they went down thither to him. And everyone that was in distress, and everyone that was in debt, and everyone that was discontented, gathered themselves unto him, and he became a captain over them, and there were with him about 400 men. Then 2 Samuel 23, 1-5. Now these be the last words of David. David, the son of Jesse, said, And the man who was raised up on high, the anointed of the God of Jacob, and the sweet psalmist of Israel, said, The Spirit of the Lord spake by me, and his word was in my tongue. The God of Israel said, The rock of Israel spake to me. He that ruleth over men must be just, ruling in the fear of God. And he shall be as the light of the morning, when the sun riseth, even a morning without clouds, as the tender grass springing out of the earth by clear shining after rain. Although my house be not so with God, yet he hath made with me an everlasting covenant, ordered in all things and sure. For this is all my salvation and all my desire, although he make it not to go. Thank you. May be seated. Now, during his days of fleeing from Saul, the Lord gave David a group of loyal followers. In this lesson, we're going to see what drew this band of mighty men to David and how they responded to his leadership. Through David's example, we're going to learn today that a godly leader will not need to demand loyalty. He will inspire it. You know, I heard an illustration a long time ago about a general said, a general doesn't trying to force his troops out onto the front lines to get the job done. He says that's like trying to push a wet noodle. You got to lead them. You can drag a wet noodle, you know, and that was an interesting illustration. You know, the generals nowadays maybe aren't on the front lines like they used to be, but it was an interesting illustration about what leadership is. It inspires people to follow true leadership. They don't have to be commanded to follow. It inspires them to follow. Now, loyalty is exchanged voluntarily will encourage the follower to dare greatly and accomplish much in the service of the Lord. So he had 400 men, mighty men, that went out to seek him. Now, we've got three goals in this lesson today. The first one is we need to understand the dynamic of the leader-follower relationship. Now, an organization rises and falls on leadership. You've heard that said. It's true in any kind of organization. And we're going to see more about how to understand that dynamic today. Secondly, realize that the characteristics of loyalty and how a leader inspires loyalty. What are the characteristics that this loyalty is inspired by? What it causes, what kind of attributes are the people that demonstrate loyalty have, and why do they demonstrate these characteristics? And thirdly, choose to follow the Lord and encourage others to do the same. Now, David and his mighty men are a great illustration of a win-win situation. Now, David was in deep trouble, you know, when Saul was chasing him. You know, you remember the last time David was in the palace, Jonathan warned him, hey, get out of here, Saul wants your head. And you remember that bow and arrow exchange they had out in the field, and then and David went into hiding after that, and he went out and he hid himself, and it must have been a really secret place, because first his family found him in the cave, and then 400 men found him in the cave. So it must have been a really highly top secret place to go, right? Nobody knew where it was, right? That always interested me. Now, this group, numbering 400 of David's mighty men, they would not be people initially that most of us probably would have picked to be part of our 400 men. Yet as David himself, the Lord looketh on the heart, and God used these mighty men, making them legendary in their time, and they're examples for us today. Now, these men would serve David for his whole life. I mean, that's where the mighty men came from. They were with them from the get-go, many of them. They first came to him when he was in trouble, but they stayed with him through the years, during all those many ups and downs, and all those victories with Goliath and defeats that he had and being chased. And today's lesson, we're going to see an overview of the years of loyalty that they demonstrated to their leader. Now, first of all, what was their attraction to their leader? Since this previous lesson that we had, Saul has become jealous of David because of his popularity and because his wise behavior, and especially the admiration that David drew from all of the people and from the servants. Saul was jealous. This was a threat to his posterity. You know, he wanted his son to sit on that throne, and he saw that this wasn't going to happen. Now, Jonathan knew that this David was going to be king, and he was all for it. But Saul didn't quite care about what the Lord had to think about these things. He was no longer a man walking in the Spirit. He was a man totally taken over by a walk with the flesh. And he was now seeking to kill David. So as we begin this lesson, we find David had escaped to this is hiding from the king, and he's escaped into this cave, Adullam. He's a fugitive. He's on the run. He'd been forsaken by almost everyone, but in verse 1 we see that his brethren and his father's house were the first ones to come to him. 1 Samuel 22, 1-2. David therefore departed thence and escaped to the cave Adullam, and when his brethren and all his father's house heard it, they went down thither to him, and everyone that was in distress. I like this one. You know, most people are in distress one reason or other, aren't they? You know, if they don't seem like they are, they're just faking it, you know. It says that everyone that was in distress, everyone that was in debt, everyone that was discontented, gathered themselves unto him, and he became a captain over them. And there were with him about 400 men. So it doesn't look like he had the HR department didn't do a good resume search on these 400 men, right? To find people with all of these skills or something that's going to come out and be his mighty men. No, they came to him because they were in the same boat. They needed help, and they thought because of what they saw in David's life before that he was innocent, and just like probably many of them were innocent for what they got themselves in trouble for. And they're out there now, and they wanted to identify with David. Now, this is a tremendous lesson for us as believers. When we see others that are part of God's family who are in distress or under attack, what do? Pull out that .357 Magnum and shoot them in the back when they're down? No, we're supposed to run to them and give them the right hand of fellowship. Uphold them in prayer when they're going through these tough times. Pick them up. Everybody's going to trip and stumble. Doesn't matter who you are. But our job is to help pick our brothers and sisters up, even when they do something nasty. You know, we're supposed to give forgiveness and try and reconcile them, restore them, you know, biblically. And so we ought to see the need, and then we ought to take the lead in trying to help people. God's people need to stick together. Now, those who came to David's aid banded together and became his mighty men. So what attracted them to David, even when he was a fugitive? You know, they had seen him. They had seen him kill Goliath. They had seen him go out and lead the armies of Israel, you know, and become the greatest general, and heard the women singing, Saul has killed his thousands, but David his 10,000s. You know, they knew that David had something going for him. So they came to him when he was a fugitive because it was based on their need. They had needs too. They needed a leader they could trust in and count on. Now, some of the most productive people in history and some who have had the greatest victories are often rejected by others. The founders of the colony of Georgia were released convicts. You know, who's to say they were guilty of the crimes that they did, but they were convicts nonetheless. Many of the indentured servants who bought their way to America had nothing more than the spirit that they brought with them to give them a start in the new country of the United States. And many great inventors were ridiculed in their own time. Jesus said, Luke 4:24, no prophet is accepted in his own country. No prophet is accepted in his own country. Same principle on that. Now, these men that fled to David, they might have been described as the offscouring of the house of Jesse. They were distressed, they were debtors, they were discontented, and we might describe them as unhappy, unfortunate bunch of misfits. But, as always, God uses the foolish things of this world to confound the wise. 1 Corinthians 1:25-29. Now, someone once said that if you think God can't use you, just remember the following list. Now, this is a long list, and some of them are pretty funny, but you can get the message from each one of them. So here's this list. Noah got drunk. Abraham was too old, right, to have a son. How many sons and daughters did he have after that? He got married again, and he had a bunch more sons and daughters, didn't he? Isaac was a daydreamer. Jacob was a liar. Leah, I changed the wording on this book. It said Leah was ugly, but I changed it to she was not very pretty. I thought that was more politically correct, right? Because I didn't see in the Bible where it says he was ugly. She's probably ugly compared to Rachel, but she was probably still good looking. Joseph was abused by his brothers. Moses had a stuttering problem. Gideon was afraid. Remember, thou mighty man, thou warrior, he's hiding behind the granary bin, threshing out the grain, right? Well, thou mighty man, right? Rahab was a prostitute. Jeremiah and Timothy were both young. David had an affair and was a murderer. Elijah was suicidal. Remember when Jezebel got on his case? She headed out in the wilderness. Well, you want to go out there to die of thirst? If the ravens hadn't come, you know, that'd have been game over for Elijah. Jonah ran from God. Naomi was a widow. Job went bankrupt. I like that one. That was all, yeah. John. Oh, this is probably the best one. John the Baptist ate bugs. Yeah. And Peter denied Christ. The disciples fell asleep while praying. Martha worried about everything. The Samaritan woman was divorced more than once. Zacchaeus was too small. Paul was too religious, and Lazarus was dead. You figure you can't be used just because you're dead. Then rise up in the spirit and put on the new man. Now, throughout the Bible history, we find people with great needs doing great things. Now, these examples teach us that God uses people with deficiencies to show his sufficiency. Now, if we think we're going to do it on our own strength, and say we think we've got lots of talents and we're just going to use those talents, well, it's okay to use your talents. But if you think you've got them and you think that they're a result of all your efforts, and you don't give God the glory, then the job's not going to get done. Our success in the Christian walk is based upon not our sufficiency in ourselves, but the sufficiency that we have in our leader. You know, Philippians 4:13 is a good verse to remember. I can do all things through Christ, which strengtheneth me. Now, that's a pretty inclusive statement, isn't it? All things. You can. Because Jesus conquered death, hell, and the grave, we can be confident that we can finish the race that God sets before us if we rely on his strength and his power. In Hebrews 12, 1 and 2, wherefore seeing we are also compassed about with a great cloud of witnesses. You know, they're all up there. They're looking down, right? Let us lay aside every weight and the sin which does so easily beset us. You know, sin easily besets us. We have to lay it aside. And let us run with patience the race that is set before us, looking unto Jesus. Have to keep your eyes on Jesus. You know, Peter had his eyes on Jesus when he jumped out on the water, and he was doing fine as long as he kept his eyes on Jesus. That's the same thing with us. We have to constantly keep our eyes on Jesus. The author and finisher of our faith, who for the joy that was set before him endured the cross, despising the shame, is set down at the right hand of the throne of God. You know, he's not on vacation. He's on the right hand of the Father, and he's making intercession for us now. So that's who's hearing our prayers. 1 Peter 5:7, casting all your care upon him, for he careth for you. Casting all your care upon him, for he careth for you. 2 Corinthians 12:9, and he said unto me, my grace is sufficient for thee. You know, he's saying this to Paul. Paul had the thorn in the flesh. He had prayed 3 times for this thorn in the flesh to go away. And God said to Paul, my grace is sufficient for thee. And for my strength is made perfect in weakness. In each one of our weakness, when we believe that we're weak before a holy and righteous God, then he can impute his strength into us. Most gladly, therefore, will I rather glory in my infirmities, that the power of Christ may rest upon me. We need his power in everything. Now, secondly, in our outline, we talk about their loyalty to the leader. Loyalty is an ingredient that is necessary both on the part of the leader and on the part of the follower. While many leaders and followers would abhor being called disloyal, their actions would probably fall into the category of neutrality. You know, they're neither disloyal or loyal. You know, they're sideliners. They're watching the action. You know, they want to be politically correct. The pastors don't want to stand up behind the pulpit and pound the book and say, thus saith the Lord. They want to tickle people's ears. They want a big crowd. They want a big offering. And to think if they're going to preach the truth, then people aren't going to come because they don't want to hear about their sins. Well, God says, do things my way and I'll bring the increase. Right. Standing true to his word. True loyalty, like love, can be thought of as a verb. You know, it's an action thing. It's not just an adjective. It's not just an emotion. It's a supportive action. Loyalty. It's a supportive action. A loyal supporter of godly authority pleases God and follows the principles and precepts of his word, line upon line, precept upon precept. And Hebrews 13:11 says, obey them that have the rule over you, and submit yourself, for they watch for your souls. Now, having said that, you're supposed to be like the Bereans. You know, search the scriptures daily to see if these things are true. Don't be following some cult leader, right? You obey them because they're preaching the book, and you're studying the book, and you're seeing that what they're saying is true from the book. Blind faith is stupidity, you know, when it comes to following leadership. It's got to be godly leadership. They served willingly. 2 Samuel 23:16, and 3 mighty men brake through the host of the Philistines and drew water out of the well of Bethlehem. That was by the gate, and took it and brought it to David. Nevertheless, he would not drink thereof, but poured it out unto the Lord. Remember, he was just musing to himself, thinking out loud, oh man, would I love to have a drink of water out of that well at Bethlehem. That's when he grew up as a kid. He could remember that water. And he was thirsty. And he said that. And 3 of his mighty men happened to overhear him. That wasn't a command. And what'd they do? They're willing to go through great lengths to fulfill the desires of the leader, and their attitude was, your wish is my command. You know, it didn't say your command is my command. It says your wish is my command. And he just had to wish of a drink of water. And these 3 men literally risked their lives breaking through the Philistine lines to get to the well, and then carry back the water back to David, and then David, he said, this is the blood of these men. I'm not going to drink it. So he poured it out under the Lord. But that's what those men were willing to do because of what they thought about David. You know, they were loyal to him. Though the poor widow couldn't give much, just too much, she gave all she had. She gave it willingly, and they were able to contribute far more money than she was able to commit far more than people that gave much more money than she did, because she gave willingly and gave her all. 2 Corinthians 8:12, for if there first be a willing mind, it is accepted according to a man hath, and not that according to the hath not. In other words, don't feel bad if you don't have much to throw on the offering plate. God knows. You know, God's saying it's your attitude, it's your heart that I'm looking for. You give me your heart, and I'll take care of the rest. A number of quotes. This is a good one. I like this one. Every church is filled with willing people. Some willing to work, some willing to watch. Mm-hmm. That's a good one. I like that. And it's so true, isn't it? It doesn't require great learning to be a Christian and be convinced of the truth of the Bible. It requires only an honest heart and a willingness to obey God. There was an illustration, you probably heard this one time before. A letter sent to David Livingstone, a missionary to Africa. And it's from the board. They were saying, have you found a good road to get where you are? If so, we've got other missionaries that would like to come. And he says, hey, I'm not interested in those kind of missionaries. I want the kind that want to come if there's no road. Mm-hmm. Right? Because the Lord knows the way through the wilderness. He doesn't need a highway 101, right? Or 401 to get you there. They served wholeheartedly. Wholeheartedly. Amen. Not half-heartedly. 2 Samuel 23:17, and he said, be it far from me, O Lord, that I should do this. Is not this not the blood of the men that went in jeopardy of their lives? Therefore we would not drink it. These things did the three mighty men. So we talked about these men. And we talked about the sacrifice that they'd made. Now, are we that willing to serve our Lord with all of our hearts, like David's men were? That if we even think he wants us to do something, are we ready for the command when he gives it? We're supposed to be ready. We're supposed to be on praying ground. We're supposed to have that still small, listen to our ear attentive to that still small voice when he gives us divine appointments. Lord makes it clear that he has a disdain for those that are lukewarm in their commitment to him. He says, you know, how many of you like warm coffee or tea? Not too many. Some people do. But nuke it, you know. He said, I'll spew thee out. He doesn't want lukewarm Christians. Revelation 3:16, so then because thou art lukewarm and neither cold nor hot, I will spew thee out of my mouth. Now Christians can make God sick with their foot dragging and their half-heartedness in his service. You know, you look back at the Old Testament story of the Israelites and God's love for the Israelites, his chosen people. Man, you know, up and down. They fell away from God much more than they ever did serve God. But they're still his chosen people, and in the end times, they're going to come back. And Jesus, you remember when he was a 12-year-old boy and they went back, I think it was to Nazareth there, he was eager to work for his father. And after they packed up and from paying the taxes and they're heading back to their hometown, they'd gone a couple days' journey, and mom and dad, they're looking for Joseph. Where is he? Mom and Joseph, I should say. They're looking for him. Where is he? He's not there. So they went back where they find him. They found him in the temple. And he said, looked so surprised, wished you not that I was supposed to be about my father's business? She was in there teaching the doctors of the law at age 12. Now, long before the beginning of his earthly ministry, Jesus was willing-hearted and wholehearted for God. And remember Samuel's challenge to Israel, and realize that it expressed God's challenge to us today. He said in 1 Samuel 12:24, only fear God and serve him in truth with all your heart, for consider how great things he hath done for you. You know, those are important words. You know, it's important to know the words. It's important to say the words. You know, but it goes further than that. This wasn't in the notes here, but it brings to mind Now, how many remember how Samuel's sons did when they grew up? They didn't do very well, did they? So you can be on fire for God, you can be serving God, and your kids can still go to the dogs, you know. Make sure you make a big priority with your kids. Don't just teach them, show them. Spend time with them. Train them up. And have that relationship. And then your kids won't be like David and won't be like Eli's and won't be like Samuel. I mean, I would have thought Samuel's kids would have turned out, but they didn't. They were taking bribes. So it doesn't matter what your pedigree is. You know, they all have to make choices. They've got to make choices themselves, but train them up in the way they should go. Today, the chief shepherd, the Lord Jesus, and the under-shepherds, the pastors of the local Bible-believing churches, are in great need of and certainly most appreciative of those who follow their leadership willingly and wholeheartedly. If they're setting a godly example, we need to give them that loyalty. Have we made it clear to the Lord and to everyone around us, both by word and deed, that our dedication and our commitment and our loyalty is to the Lord Jesus Christ? We need to take our stand for Christ on a regular basis with new contacts that you make at work or in the neighborhood. Then their mightiness for their leader was shown. David was truly a mighty man in his own right. In the previous study of this victory over Goliath, we saw him do that what was impossible from a human perspective, but did it through the power of God. This mighty man, mighty in God, mighty for God, was able to attract other mighty men to his cause. Now we're going to look at some of the details of their great deeds. They were valiant. 2 Samuel 21:16-22. And Ishbi-Benob, which was of the sons of the giant, the weight of whose spear weighed 300 shekels of brass in weight, it's about 17 pounds, he being girded with a new sword, thought to have slain David. But Abishai, the son of Uriah, that was his first cousin, succored him and smote the Philistine, killed him. Then the men of David sware to him, saying, Thou shalt go no more out with us to battle, that thou quench not the light of Israel. That's when David was getting a little older and he wasn't as spry of foot anymore. He probably had a walker too, you know, out there. And it came to pass after this that there was yet a battle again with the Philistines at Gob. And then Sibbecai, the Hushite, slew Saph, which was of the sons of the giant. There was again a battle in Gob with the Philistines where Elhanan, the son of Jeroorgiam, a Bethlehemite, slew the brother of Goliath the Gittite, the staff of whose spear was like a weaver's beam. And there was yet a battle in Gath where a man of great stature had on every hand 6 fingers, on every foot 6 toes, 24 in number. And he also was born to the giant. And when he defied Israel, Jonathan the son of Shimeah, the brother of David, slew him. These 4 were born to the giant in Gath and fell by the hand of David and by the hand of his servants. Notice there were 4 others. Remember, David he probably gave those 4 stones that he had in his bag just the other guys, just one, just for some kind of a keepsake there. So they used different weapons, but he probably did that. Now, these mighty men won victories that sound like they came from epic legends or some sounding science fiction, but they didn't. They used the same power of God that David did to accomplish those victories. They saw that David could do it, and then they said, then I can do it if David can do it through the power of God. More examples of valiant actions of David's men are found in 2 Samuel 23:18. We read of Abishai. He not only killed the giant singularly, but he went out and took on 300 of the enemy and killed them. Here we find the story of Benaiah, who slew 2 lion-like men of Moab and went down alone into a pit and killed a lion. And he also killed an Egyptian by plucking his own spear from him and killing him. And these were mighty acts. Said they were victorious through the Lord. When you think of these incidents and you visualize them, imagine the courage and the skill, but above all, imagine the enabling of the God and the fact that they were depending on the Lord to give them that power. Amen. It had to be faith. I mean, how do you go down to a pit with a lion, right? Maybe if you had some big chunk of meat with them, you know, to hold them off. Nice kitty, you know, but what? You're going to go down there and grab him by his beard? I don't think so. Now, Psalm 60:12 says, through God we shall do valiantly, for he it is that shall tread down our enemies. How else can one guy take 300? You know, how can you do that? Another illustration, there was a missionary in the 1800s by the name of James Calvert. He was out and they were going to go become missionaries to cannibals in the Fiji Islands. So Fiji Islands, I guess, originally had cannibals. And as the ship Calvert had taken near the islands, the captain paused and said, you know, you ought to reconsider. You know, you'll lose your life and those of your associates if you go across and into those islands with those savages. And Calvert's response was, we died before we came here. You know, if God gives you the marching orders, you know, nothing's going to happen to you until he's ready to take you home.
That's right.
So nothing to fear about. And they knew that. They said, we'd given our all before we came. And many stories could be told about recent missionaries who were willing to give their lives for the cause of Christ. And their efforts to spread the gospel in the regions of the world where people have never heard about Christ. We have lots of our missionaries going to places like that. That takes sacrifice. We need to make sure we pray for them. And then they were victorious. 2 Samuel 23, 9-12. And after him was Eleazar the son of Dodo, the Ahohite, one of the 3 mighty men with David. When they defied the Philistines that were there gathered together in battle, and the men of Israel were gone away, he arose and smote the Philistines until his hand was weary and his hand clave under the sword. And the Lord wrought a great victory that day, and the people returned after him only to spoil. And after him was Shammah the son of Agi the Hararite, and the Philistines were gathered together into a troop where was a piece of ground full of lentils, and the people fled from the Philistines. So everybody left. But him, he stood in the midst of the ground and defended it and slew the Philistines, and once again, and the Lord wrought a great victory. Amen. So we have to have a willingness to take a stand for Christ, trusting in him and his power, and then the Lord will do the great victory. Victory is the Lord's. He's the one that's willing to battle, but you got to be willing to stand. If you're not willing to stand, God's power is not going to be demonstrated. When a crew of workers builds a house, it's the head of the crew and the workers who are said to have built the house, not the tools. In our case, in the Lord's work, we're just tools. It's the Lord that builds a house, and we're tools in his hand. As for Eleazar, the Bible records that although his hand was weary, his hand clave under the sword. He didn't drop it. He held on to it all the tighter, and again the Lord wrought a great victory. Isaiah 40:31, but they that wait on the Lord shall renew their strength. They shall mount up with wings like eagles. They shall run and not be weary. They shall walk and not faint. That is a scripture everybody ought to memorize. Because we're all going to get weary, right? And we got to remember that, hey, if we just wait on the Lord, he'll give us the strength to mount up like wings on eagles and run, not be weary when we're doing the Lord's work. Now, the conclusion of the whole matter is, in the day that we live as in the days of David, God's army is in need of mighty men. Do we want to be a mighty man or a mighty woman for God? It's a choice, you know. The invitation is there. We also need to follow and be loyal to our godly leaders and seek to do great and mighty things in God's name. And the God of glory will win all the victories for his namesake. So let's go forth and do battle for the Lord and let him have all the glory.